The grand clock in the living room struck midnight, but Thomas didn't hear it. He was lost in the sound of his own breathing, the silence of the mansion pressing in on him like a heavy weight. The soft hum of the air conditioning couldn't drown out the pounding in his chest, nor could it calm his nerves. Tonight should have been special. A night to celebrate. But all he felt was a rising dread that refused to leave. It was Anna's birthday. She was seated across the room, radiant in a beautiful red dress, the kind of woman everyone noticed the second she entered a room. Her laughter filled the space around them as she spoke with their closest friends, exchanging stories, jokes, and wine. She looked happy, completely unaware of what was simmering beneath the surface. Of what was about to unravel. Thomas knew he should be there beside her, enjoying the evening, smiling at her jokes, laughing at the right times. He should have been playing the role of the devoted husband, the perfect partner. But how could he? When his mind was racing in 1,000 directions, each thought darker than the last. The knock at the door had been a signal, a sign of what was coming. At first, he ignored it, hoping it was just a random visitor or a delivery. But when it came again, his heart skipped a beat. The knock wasn't casual. It was urgent, insistent, and his stomach twisted in knots. He knew who it was, and he couldn't hide from her any longer. Anna glanced over at him from the corner of her eye, noticing his stiff posture. She raised an eyebrow, concern flashing across her face. "Thomas, everything okay?" "Yeah," he managed to say, his voice betraying none of the panic rising within him. "Just, need some air." He gave a half-smile, but it felt more like a grimace. He stood up abruptly, brushing past their guests, not meeting anyone's eyes. The hallway seemed longer than usual as he walked towards the front door, each step feeling heavier than the last. His palms were clammy, and his chest felt tight. What had started as a seemingly innocent affair had spiraled out of control, and now there was no turning back. Sophie was here, and she was carrying his child. When he reached the door, the sound of the knock came again, and his heart slammed against his ribs. This was it. This was the moment he couldn't avoid any longer. He opened the door with a forced calm, but as soon as his eyes landed on Sophie, the air seemed to evaporate from his lungs. She was standing there, her presence so stark against the well-lit backdrop of the foyer, dressed in a long coat despite the warmth of the evening. She looked smaller than usual, her face pale and drawn, eyes wide and nervous, as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff and about to leap. Sophie didn't say anything immediately, just stared at him for a long moment, as if searching for something. Her silence was deafening. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling in the cold air. "Thomas," her voice cracked. I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a bolt of lightning. He had been bracing himself for many things, angry accusations, questions, fear, but not this. Not the confirmation that he was about to lose everything. His world, already teetering on the edge of collapse, now seemed to crumble beneath him. The truth felt like it had weight, a tangible force that pushed down on his chest, forcing him to take a shaky breath. His stomach twisted into knots, and for a moment, he thought he might vomit. Sophie, sensing his shock, stepped forward, closer than he expected. She was close enough for him to smell the faint scent of perfume, a scent that reminded him of their secret meetings, the late-night drives, the stolen moments they'd shared away from prying eyes. She had always been the one he ran to when things with Anna became too much, too complicated. But this was something far more complex. This was real. This was life-altering. Her eyes, usually so full of confidence and warmth, now appeared tired, even desperate. Her lips trembled as she continued, her words hanging heavy in the air. "Thomas, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. But I'm keeping it. I'm keeping the baby." Thomas felt like he was suffocating. Keeping it. The weight of those words pressed on him like a 1,000-pound boulder. He should have said something, anything, but all he could do was stare at her, his mind racing, trying to process the gravity of what was happening. He couldn't let this ruin his life. He couldn't let it destroy everything he'd built. He couldn't destroy Anna. But how could he fix this? How could he make this go away? There were no easy answers, no simple solutions. He had made a mistake, a series of mistakes, and now they were coming back to haunt him. "Sophie," he started, his voice low and tight. This is insane." He shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no simple fix. "You can't do this. You can't," he was about to say more, but Sophie stepped forward, cutting him off. "I have to," she whispered, her hand shaking as she reached out to touch his arm. "You don't get to decide that, Thomas. This is happening, whether you want it to or not." Her words were like a slap, sharp and undeniable. His heart thudded in his chest. His head was spinning, and in that moment, he felt completely powerless, as though his life was slipping away from him, bit by bit. They stood there in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them, until Sophie's voice broke the quiet again. "I'm scared," she repeated, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "But I don't know what else to do. I can't do this alone." And then, before Thomas could speak, before he could offer any kind of reassurance or even denial, she kissed him. It was quick, urgent, filled with emotion, an explosion of feelings, fear, longing, desperation. His mind screamed at him to pull away, to stop this madness, but his body didn't obey. It was a kiss that had no place in this moment, a kiss that was a reflection of everything wrong with what they had done, but it happened anyway. He pulled back almost immediately, his breath catching in his throat. His mind was whirling, spinning in a blur of confusion. But as soon as he stepped away, something inside of him cracked. His knees buckled, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse right there. His vision blurred. His chest tightened, and a sharp pain gripped him, forcing him to the floor. He tried to stay upright, but the weight of it all was too much. He couldn't breathe. The truth was suffocating him. He heard a faint voice in the distance, barely audible through the fog in his mind. Sophie was calling his name, but it sounded muffled, far away. He couldn't hear her clearly. The room felt like it was spinning, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The phone rang. He forced his head to lift, staring at the vibrating phone on the table across from him. The name on the screen burned his eyes. It was Anna. He couldn't answer. Not now. Not when everything was unraveling so quickly. The silence in the room felt thick, suffocating, like the air itself was holding its breath. He couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. Everything was crumbling. The truth was coming, whether he was ready for it or not. And there was no way out. Thomas lay on the cold marble floor, staring up at the chandelier above, the light from it casting soft shadows across the room. His chest heaved, struggling to find a rhythm in the chaos of his mind. His pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out the distant ringing of his phone. Sophie's words echoed in his head, repeating over and over again. "I'm pregnant." The room felt too small, the air too thick. His throat burned as he tried to take in a full breath, but his lungs seemed to refuse him. This wasn't just about Sophie. This wasn't just about a kiss. This wasn't even about Anna anymore, although the weight of her name on his chest felt like an anchor that refused to let him rise. This was about something deeper. Something much more dangerous. A truth that was circling around him like a predator, closing in with each passing moment. He could hear Sophie's voice from somewhere far off. She was talking, but the words didn't quite reach him. He felt like he was underwater, hearing things as if through a thick veil. The feeling of suffocation pressed harder. Panic. Regret. Fear. It all swirled in his chest like a storm. And still, the phone rang. With a strangled gasp, Thomas managed to push himself into a sitting position, his body trembling from the strain. His hand instinctively reached out to grab the phone, the glowing screen illuminating his shaking fingers. Anna. Her name was like a knife in his gut. He had to pick up. There was no avoiding it anymore. He couldn't ignore her call. Not with everything hanging by a thread. He pressed the green button, holding the phone to his ear. The line was silent for a moment before Anna's voice came through. Thomas? Her voice was light, almost playful. Where are you? The party's still going strong. Everyone's waiting for you. He felt a pang of guilt hit him hard in the chest. She had no idea. No idea what was unfolding just steps away from her, in the hallway, in the shadows of their marriage. I'm sorry, Anna, he said, his voice shaky. I needed to step outside for a moment. Just needed some air. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You're not feeling sick, are you? You've been acting strange tonight. I'm fine, Thomas replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. His voice didn't sound convincing, not even to his own ears. He heard Anna's breath on the other side of the line, a slight sigh, the soft shuffle of her footsteps. She was moving around, no doubt still caught up in the laughter and conversation of their guests. You sure? You know you can tell me anything, she said, her tone softening. But don't take too long. I need you here, Thomas. It's my birthday. The words sliced through him. The weight of his betrayal, the suffocating reality of his secret, loomed over him like a thundercloud. I'll be there soon, I promise, he said, his voice cracking. He didn't know if he was talking to Anna or to himself. He didn't know if he was trying to reassure her or if he was trying to convince himself that everything was going to be okay. Okay, Anna replied, sounding slightly relieved. I'll see you in a bit, love. The call ended, and Thomas sat there, holding the phone in his hand, staring at the blank screen, unable to move. He was trapped. Trapped between the life he had built and the life that was crashing down on him. He could feel the walls closing in, each breath heavier than the last. He didn't know how long he sat there, but the sound of a soft step broke him from his stupor. Sophie was standing just a few feet away, her figure outlined by the soft light from the hallway. She looked at him with an intensity that made his stomach drop. You have to tell her, Thomas, Sophie said, her voice low but insistent. His head snapped up. What? The word came out harsh, almost a shout. You have to tell her. You can't keep this from her. It's not just your life that's at stake here. Anna deserves the truth. Thomas clenched his jaw, the weight of her words pressing harder against him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What was there to say? What could he possibly say that would make any of this okay? He stood up, his legs unsteady beneath him, and walked past Sophie, moving toward the window as if it could offer him some kind of clarity. He needed to think. He needed to figure out how to fix this, how to fix everything before it was too late. But no matter how much he tried, the reality of the situation wouldn't fade. Sophie was pregnant. With his child. And he was married to Anna. The woman who had been his partner, his confidant, his everything for the last decade. His mind raced back to the beginning, to the moment everything had started. He remembered the first time he'd laid eyes on Sophie, how different she was from Anna. Sophie was wild, spontaneous, unpredictable in all the ways that Anna was not. She was everything he had been craving, everything that had been missing in his life. But the more he'd given in to the affair, the more he'd realized that he wasn't just running away from Anna, he was running away from himself. From the man he had become, the man who thought he could have it all without paying the price. But now the price was here. It had arrived in the form of Sophie's pregnancy, of Anna's birthday, of the life he had built crumbling around him. He turned to Sophie, his face dark with emotion. What do you want from me? His voice was raw, edged with frustration. Sophie's expression softened, and she took a step closer, her eyes filled with something that resembled pity. I don't want anything from you, Thomas. I just want the truth to be out there. I want to stop living in fear. I can't do this alone. Thomas looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. She wasn't the confident woman he had met months ago. She was terrified. And he realized something then: he wasn't the only one whose life was about to shatter. Sophie had just as much to lose. I can't leave Anna, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The word sounded foreign to him, as though he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. You already have, Sophie replied quietly. You left her the moment you kissed me. You left her the moment you made this mistake. Don't you see? We can't go back now. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders, the realization sinking in deeper. She was right. He had already left Anna. He had left her emotionally long before Sophie had ever entered the picture. The kiss was just the final act, the one that sealed their fate. You need to tell her, Thomas. You can't keep lying, Sophie said, her voice gentle but firm. If you don't, this will eat you alive. He looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. What had he done? How had he allowed himself to get to this point? I don't know how, he whispered. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix this, Sophie replied, her voice tinged with sadness. But you can start being honest. And maybe that's enough to begin again. Thomas looked at her, feeling a strange sense of resignation. For the first time in a long time, he realized there was no way out. No way to undo what had been done. He couldn't take back the kiss. He couldn't take back the lies. All he could do now was face the truth. And in that moment, the truth felt like a weight he didn't know how to carry. The phone in his hand vibrated again. Its screen lighting up with Anna's name once more. He didn't know if he was ready to face her. But he knew he had no choice. The phone buzzed again in Thomas's hand, its screen lighting up with the name that haunted him. Anna. Her call, her voice, the echo of the words she'd spoken earlier. I need you here, Thomas. It's my birthday. Those words clawed at his conscience, but the weight of what had transpired in the past few hours felt like a force that wouldn't let him breathe. He stared at the phone, watching it vibrate relentlessly. His stomach churned, a pit forming deeper with every ring. He didn't pick up. Not this time. Why don't you answer? Sophie's voice cut through the thick silence that hung between them. She hadn't moved from her spot near the window, but her presence felt as oppressive as the storm gathering in the night sky. Her eyes, once filled with confusion, had settled into a calm, almost expectant stare. It was as if she knew exactly what was going on in his mind. Her every word, her every look seemed to punctuate the realization that the walls were closing in, and he was standing at the edge, unable to find a way back. I can't keep doing this, Sophie, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands were trembling as he placed the phone on the counter, his fingers brushing the screen just enough to silence the call. What exactly are you doing, Thomas? Sophie asked, stepping closer, her gaze unwavering. Are you going to pretend like this isn't happening? That nothing has changed? Because it has. Everything has changed. He clenched his jaw, looking away from her. The room was closing in on him, and the noise in his head, the demands, the guilt, the chaos, was deafening. He didn't want to face it, didn't want to acknowledge what had been set in motion. But Sophie was right. He had already chosen. It wasn't about Anna anymore. It wasn't about the life he'd built with her. The kiss had sealed it. The affair had already sealed it long ago, but now, Sophie's pregnancy was the final irrevocable truth. It was a decision he had made even before his lips had touched hers. He couldn't run from it. Not anymore. "I don't know what to say," he muttered. "I don't know what to do." Sophie stepped into his line of sight, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Tell Anna the truth," she said quietly, almost gently, as if she were trying to offer him some kind of peace. "Stop pretending you can keep living in this lie. Stop pretending you can have it both ways." Thomas recoiled as though the words had been a slap. He wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to face Anna, wasn't ready to unravel the fragile web of lies that had kept his world intact for so long. He wasn't ready for the fallout, the anger, the heartache. He wasn't ready to lose everything. He wasn't ready to see Anna's face when she realized the truth. Sophie's eyes softened as she saw the conflict written across his face. She reached out and touched his arm. "You know it's the only way, Thomas. You know deep down that Anna deserves more than this." A silence settled between them. His chest felt tight, like he couldn't get enough air. His mind raced, darting from the worst possible scenarios to others, less terrifying but equally devastating. But what if she never forgave him? What if their marriage, which had always seemed unshakable, crumbled into dust? What if Anna left? He wanted to scream, to tell Sophie that he was scared, that he didn't know how to fix it. But he remained silent, consumed by the fear of the unknown. The fear of telling Anna the truth was suffocating, even though he knew, deep down, that it was the only way forward. "You'll never be free until you tell her," Sophie whispered. Thomas stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him like a cloud. He didn't know if Sophie was right. What would telling Anna the truth even accomplish? Would it make it better? Would it make it worse? Another wave of guilt hit him like a truck. He turned away, pacing, trying to clear his head, but the room felt smaller, more suffocating, with every step. Sophie stood there, watching him, her face unreadable. She wasn't rushing him. She wasn't pushing him anymore. She had already made her peace with what was happening. She had chosen her path. She had made her decision. And now, it was his turn. "Where will you go?" he suddenly asked, his voice almost a whisper. It wasn't the question he wanted to ask, but it came out anyway. Where would Sophie go once the truth came out? After everything, after the baby, after the kiss, where would she fit into his life? What would his life even look like once Anna knew everything? Sophie didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him, her expression soft but tinged with sadness. "I don't know," she said after a long pause. "I'll figure it out. But you need to figure it out too, Thomas. For Anna. For the both of you." Her words hung in the air. They weren't just for Anna. They were for him too. Sophie didn't expect him to fix everything, she just wanted him to stop running. And as much as he wanted to believe that he could find a way out of this mess, he knew deep down that he couldn't keep running from the truth forever. Sooner or later, it would find him. And when it did, it would tear him apart. Thomas's thoughts were still churning as he found himself back in the living room. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all felt so distant now. It was like he was a spectator in his own life, watching as everything he had built slowly slipped through his fingers. Anna was still surrounded by their friends, still smiling, unaware of the storm that was about to break. But how could he do it? How could he destroy everything they had? Could he really look into Anna's eyes and tell her what he had done? That he had been unfaithful, that he had betrayed her, that he had, most unforgivably, fathered a child with another woman? As he walked across the room, his feet feeling heavy with every step, he could feel the weight of the choice ahead. Anna looked up from her conversation, her eyes lighting up when she saw him approach. "There you are," she said with a smile that was both warm and relieved. "I was starting to think you weren't coming back." For a split second, Thomas thought about turning back. He could leave, go outside, get some fresh air. Maybe it would all feel different in the morning. But he knew it wouldn't. He knew there was no running from this. He could feel the truth creeping into every corner of the room, waiting for its moment. "Anna," he started, his voice rough and unsure. She looked at him curiously, sensing that something was off. "I need to talk to you." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by a furrowed brow. "What's wrong?" she asked, suddenly concerned. She stood up, her gaze searching his face. "I've made some mistakes," he said, his throat tightening as the words seemed to choke him. "Some things that I can't hide anymore." Her eyes widened, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for his arm. "Thomas, what are you talking about?" This was it. The moment had arrived. The moment he had been avoiding for so long. "I've been unfaithful to you, Anna," he said, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a rush. There's someone else. And I've made her pregnant." The room seemed to collapse around him. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The music, the laughter, the world outside, they all vanished as he stood there, frozen in place, waiting for Anna's response. The silence in the room was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than any words ever could. Anna stood frozen, her face drained of color, her expression a mix of disbelief and shock. Her hands trembled as she slowly released Thomas's arm, stepping back, as though trying to distance herself from the reality he had just shattered. "Thomas, what are you saying?" Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile as glass. Thomas stood there, unable to move, his legs like lead beneath him. The weight of the moment pressed down on him with unbearable force. He had done it. He had said the words. But now that they were out in the open, now that Anna knew, there was no going back. The dam had broken, and the flood of consequences had begun. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he possibly say now? What could fix this? He had never imagined that the truth would hit so hard, that it would leave him feeling so small, so insignificant. All the lies he had told, all the secrets he had kept, had led to this moment. And now, as Anna stood there before him, her face crumpling with pain and disbelief, Thomas realized that he had destroyed something far more precious than his own reputation. Her eyes searched his face, as if she were looking for some explanation, some shred of reassurance that could make sense of the chaos he had just unleashed. But there was nothing left to explain. There were no excuses. There was no justification. I didn't know what to do, Anna," Thomas finally said, his voice hoarse. "I was confused. I made a terrible mistake. But it doesn't change what we have, what we've built together." Anna didn't speak. She just shook her head slowly, her lips trembling as if she were trying to hold back a flood of emotions that were too powerful to contain. Her eyes, once full of warmth and love, were now cold and distant. It was as if the woman he had known for all these years had suddenly disappeared, replaced by a stranger who had been betrayed beyond measure. Confused, she finally managed to say, her voice laced with disbelief. "Is that how you justify it? You've been sleeping with someone else behind my back, Thomas. And now you want me to believe that you were confused? You've broken me, and all you can say is that you were confused?" Thomas winced at the pain in her voice, at the raw hurt that radiated from her every word. He had known that telling her the truth would hurt her, but he hadn't known it would cut this deep. The guilt that had already been gnawing at him now turned into something far more consuming, a shame so vast, so overwhelming, that it threatened to suffocate him. "I'm sorry, Anna. I know that doesn't make it better, but I am so sorry," Thomas said, his voice breaking with emotion. She stepped back, putting more distance between them, as if to shield herself from the tidal wave of emotions she was struggling to control. Her eyes were wide with shock, her face pale, as though she had just witnessed something impossible. "Sorry," she repeated, her voice trembling with anger now. Sorry isn't enough, Thomas. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. It doesn't take back the lies, the betrayal. It doesn't fix the fact that you've torn apart everything I thought we had. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? There was nothing that would make this better. No words, no actions, no apologies could undo the hurt he had caused. All he had was the truth now, and the terrible weight of it pressed on him like 1,000 pounds. Anna's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress tightly. I need to go, she said, her voice barely audible. She turned towards the door, her movements stiff, as if she were trying to escape not just the room but the very reality of the situation. No, Anna, please, Thomas begged, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out for her, but she pulled away, shaking her head. I can't. I can't do this right now, she said, her voice breaking. I need time to think. I need to be alone. Before he could stop her, Anna was out the door, her footsteps fading as she rushed out of the house, leaving Thomas standing there, his heart in pieces. He stood in the middle of the room, the faint sounds of laughter and conversation from their party guests drifting in from the other room, oblivious to the storm that had just torn his life apart. And then, as if the weight of it all had been too much to bear, Thomas collapsed onto the couch, his hands clutching at his hair, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could feel the tears threatening to spill, but he refused to let them fall. He had been too much of a coward already. He didn't deserve the luxury of tears. Outside, the night had fallen into a stillness that matched the heavy silence inside the house. Anna's car was long gone, and the house felt eerily quiet, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something that wasn't coming. Thomas's mind raced as he sat in the darkened room. He couldn't help but wonder where Anna had gone. Had she gone to a friend's house? Was she driving around, trying to escape the suffocating reality he had created? Or was she simply sitting alone somewhere, broken and wondering what had gone wrong? He had known it would be bad, but he hadn't known it would feel like this. He hadn't known that his betrayal would fracture not only his marriage but also his own sense of self. The man he had been, the man who had thought he could control everything, was gone. All that was left was the wreckage of a life that had once seemed so perfect. His phone buzzed again on the table, and he looked at the screen, dreading what he might see. It was a message from Sophie. Sophie, I know you're hurting, Thomas. But you need to fix this with Anna. You need to go after her. She deserves the truth from you, not just the half-hearted apology you gave her earlier. You need to show her that you're willing to fight for her. The words were blunt, but they were true. Sophie was right. He had taken the first step in telling Anna the truth, but he hadn't done enough. He hadn't fought for her. He had thrown the truth at her like a grenade and expected everything to be okay. But that wasn't how it worked. That wasn't how real love worked. With a deep, resigned sigh, Thomas picked up his phone and typed a message back to Sophie. Thomas, I know. I'll go after her. I just need to make things right. He put his phone down and stood up, feeling the weight of what he had to do settle over him once more. He had no idea where Anna had gone or how to fix what had been broken. But he had to try. If there was even the slightest chance of saving their marriage, of saving what was left of his life, he had to try. With a determination he hadn't felt in a long time, Thomas grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. He didn't know where Anna was, but he wasn't going to let this be the end of their story. Not yet. Anna was nowhere to be found. He drove through the city streets, his mind racing as he searched for any sign of her. His thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation they had just had. The look in her eyes when he had told her the truth. The pain, the disbelief, it was all too much for him to comprehend. How had they gone from being so happy to being here, at this terrible crossroad? Finally, after what felt like an eternity of driving, Thomas pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe by the lake. He saw her car parked near the entrance, the headlights dimmed. His heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if it was a sign that she had come here to think or if it was her way of avoiding him. But one thing was certain, she was here. He got out of the car, his legs unsteady as he made his way toward the cafe. The moonlight cast long shadows on the water, and the gentle ripples of the lake seemed to match the turmoil inside him. When he reached the entrance, he pushed open the door, half expecting to see Anna sitting alone in a corner, her eyes empty with grief. But instead, what he saw made his blood run cold. Anna was sitting at a table, her back to him. But she wasn't alone. There was someone with her. Someone he didn't recognize. Thomas froze in the doorway. The air felt thick, every breath dragging with a suffocating weight. There, across the small cafe, was Anna, her back to him, her shoulders hunched as if she were trying to shrink into herself, to hide from the reality she couldn't escape. But it wasn't just Anna sitting alone in the corner. There was someone else. A man. He sat across from her, his back to Thomas, but there was no mistaking the intimacy in their posture. The way the man was leaning in slightly, his voice low and comforting. The way Anna's body seemed to stiffen the moment she saw Thomas, her eyes flicking to him for just a moment before darting away. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest as a wave of dread swept over him. A familiar feeling, sinking, heavy, and cold, settled in his gut. He hadn't expected this. He had expected Anna to be alone, to be lost in her own thoughts, but this? This was something entirely different. The man looked up at the sound of the door opening, his eyes locking onto Thomas's. They were dark eyes, cool and unflinching, and there was something in his gaze, something unspoken, that made the hairs on Thomas's neck stand on end. The man didn't smile. He didn't look surprised, just calm, as if he had been waiting for Thomas to show up. Thomas didn't move. He stood there, frozen, his hand still gripping the doorframe as he fought to keep his breath steady. His thoughts were a whirlwind, each one more frantic than the last. What was Anna doing here with this man? Why hadn't she told him about him? Was this the man she had been seeing? The one Thomas had suspected, the one who had been in the back of his mind since that first kiss with Sophie? The silence stretched out, thick and heavy between them. Anna finally turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. Her lips parted, as if she were going to speak, but no words came. She only stared at him. Her face pale, eyes raw and bloodshot from the tears she'd already shed. Thomas could see the pain in her gaze. The betrayal. The disbelief. And yet, there was something else too, something more. Hurt. Anger. A deep, burning kind of anger. The man across from Anna stood up slowly, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape. He moved toward Thomas with a deliberate calmness, as if he had known this moment would come, as if he had prepared for it. There was no sign of surprise in his demeanor, no hesitation. He was too composed for someone who had just met the man whose life was about to be shattered. Thomas's pulse quickened, but he held his ground. He wasn't going to be intimidated. Not this time. The man stopped just a few feet in front of him, standing tall and confident. He was older than Thomas, perhaps in his early 40s, and wore a sharp, tailored suit that looked out of place in the casual atmosphere of the cafe. His hair was dark, slightly graying at the temples, and he had a well-groomed beard that added to his commanding presence. His eyes were calculating, cool, like a man who had seen it all and was unbothered by whatever came next. "I'm David," the man said, his voice smooth and steady, with an edge of authority. "You must be Thomas." Thomas didn't respond immediately. His mind was still reeling, trying to process the surreal situation unfolding in front of him. Anna was sitting there, looking at him with those eyes that had once been filled with love but were now nothing more than a reflection of the damage he had caused. And this man, David, he wasn't just a bystander. He wasn't just a friend or a casual acquaintance. There was something deeper between them, something that Thomas couldn't quite grasp. "Anna's told me everything, Thomas," David continued, his tone polite but firm, as though he were stating a fact rather than offering an explanation. "I know what you've done. I know what's been going on. And I'm here because Anna needs someone she can trust." Thomas's breath hitched. She told him everything? His mind raced back to that night, to Sophie, to the moment when everything had begun to unravel. How long had Anna known? Had she suspected? Or had she only just found out the full extent of his betrayal? Anna didn't look at him. She kept her gaze fixed on the table, her hands clenched into fists on her lap. Her silence spoke volumes, louder than anything she could have said. Her pain was evident, and in that moment, Thomas realized that there was no coming back from this. Not for him. Not for them. David glanced at Anna, then back at Thomas. "I think you should leave," he said coolly. There was no malice in his voice, just a quiet sense of finality, as though he had already made his judgment. "Anna doesn't need to see you right now. She needs space. And she needs someone who understands what she's going through." Thomas's stomach churned. The words stung, but they weren't entirely unexpected. He had been prepared for anger, for frustration, for the whirlwind of emotions that would surely come from Anna once she knew the truth. But this was something else. This was a man who wasn't just trying to protect Anna, he was trying to take her away from him. Trying to erase the bond they had, the life they had built. "Who are you to tell me to leave?" Thomas's voice was sharp, his anger bubbling up despite his best efforts to stay calm. "Who the hell are you?" David remained unmoved, his expression a mask of quiet resolve. "I'm someone who knows what it's like to be betrayed," he said quietly. "And I'm not about to let you hurt her any more than you already have." The words hit Thomas like a slap, but before he could respond, Anna finally lifted her head. She didn't look at him, but her voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Please, Thomas," she said, her tone so quiet it was almost a whisper. "Just go." Her words were a final blow. A request. A plea. Anna, the woman he had promised to cherish, to protect, was asking him to leave. To walk away from everything they had shared. To step out of the life he had built with her. And he had no choice but to comply. For a long moment, Thomas just stood there, staring at her. His heart ached, a deep, painful ache that made it feel like something was physically cracking inside of him. But he couldn't stay. Not anymore. Not when she had made her choice. Without saying another word, he turned and walked out of the cafe. His footsteps echoed in the empty street as he made his way to his car, each step heavier than the last. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he did, he feared that he would break. That he would shatter into 1,000 pieces. As he sat in his car, staring blankly at the steering wheel, the weight of the situation finally settled on him. Anna had made it clear. She didn't want him anymore. She had found someone else to turn to. Someone who wasn't him. Someone who had been there for her in ways Thomas had failed to be. David. The name echoed in Thomas's mind. Who was this man? How long had he been in Anna's life? How long had he been there, lurking in the background, waiting for his moment? Thomas slammed his fist against the steering wheel, frustration and helplessness surging through him like an uncontrollable wave. He didn't know how to fix this. He didn't know if it could be fixed. He didn't know if Anna would ever forgive him, if she would ever be able to look at him the same way again. But one thing was clear. Everything he had ever taken for granted, the love, the trust, the stability of his life, was gone. And there was no going back. Thomas sat in his car, staring out at the darkened street. The engine had long been turned off, but the silence inside the vehicle felt suffocating. His mind was a battlefield, torn between guilt, rage, regret, and desperation. He had left the cafe in a daze, his thoughts clouded with the image of Anna sitting there with David. Someone who had clearly taken his place in her life. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. What was he supposed to do now? Where did he go from here? Was there any way to salvage what had been shattered? Or was this the end? The painful truth was creeping in, and the more he thought about it, the more certain he became that things might never be the same again. A soft knock on his car window broke through his reverie. He jumped, his heart racing, before recognizing the figure standing outside. It was Sophie. Her face was tired, drawn with the kind of concern that only came from knowing someone deeply. She stood there in the cold, waiting for him to roll down the window. Her eyes softened as she caught sight of his worn-out expression, as if she already knew everything. Without saying a word, Thomas unlocked the door, and Sophie slid into the passenger seat beside him, closing the door gently behind her. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The only sound was the quiet hum of the city in the distance, the occasional passing car, and the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. Sophie studied him, her gaze steady, but there was no judgment in her eyes, only the kind of understanding that only a close friend could offer. Finally, she broke the silence. "Anna's with him now, isn't she?" Thomas nodded slowly, the motion feeling heavier than it should have. The word seemed to escape him, as if he could no longer articulate the pain that seemed to press down on him, suffocating him with every breath. "You know, I never thought you'd end up here," Sophie continued softly. "You always seemed like the kind of guy who had it all under control, the guy who always had the answers. But now? Look at you. You're lost, Thomas. And I'm afraid there's no easy way out." Her honesty stung, but it was the truth. Thomas had lived his life with the belief that he could control everything. He was the master of his own destiny, a man who was untouchable, until everything came crashing down. And now? Now, he was just a man, struggling to keep his head above water in a world he could no longer understand. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted this. I was so stupid. I thought I could keep everything, Anna, Sophie, the affair, separate. But it all fell apart, and now it's too late." Sophie didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze out the window, staring into the night as if contemplating her own thoughts. The wind blew her hair back from her face, and for a moment, Thomas couldn't help but think of how much she had always been there for him, how much she had stood by him through all the highs and lows of his life. She had seen him through his worst and still stuck around, like a steady anchor in the storm. But now? Now, Sophie had no answers. She had no magic words to fix the mess he had made. "You don't get to choose the consequences of your actions," Sophie said softly, turning her eyes back to Thomas. "You've hurt Anna, and it's not something that can be undone. She's not going to just forgive you because you feel sorry. You have to live with the damage you've done. And that means accepting the reality that she might never come back." Her words hung in the air like a thick fog, the weight of them sinking deep into Thomas's chest. The truth was undeniable. Anna was no longer the woman he had once known. She had changed. She had been changed by him, by his betrayal. And though part of him still held on to the hope that they could rebuild, that he could fix things, Sophie's words shattered that illusion. "I don't know what to do," Thomas said, his voice strained. "I don't know how to fix this. How can I go to her and ask her to forgive me when I've already broken her?" Sophie's face softened with sympathy, but there was no easy answer to give. "The hardest part is accepting that you might not be able to fix it, Thomas. Sometimes, people change. Sometimes, they grow apart. And sometimes, forgiveness doesn't come easy." Thomas clenched his jaw, feeling the sting of her words deep in his bones. "But I can't just let her go. I love her. I've always loved her." Sophie nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "Love isn't always enough," Thomas. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't undo the damage that's been done. Thomas sat in silence, feeling the walls close in around him. The city, the car, the entire world seemed to fade into the background as his mind replayed the events over and over. Anna. David. His mistakes. His lies. His guilt. The pain was unbearable. Every thought, every image, every memory of Anna felt like a knife twisting in his chest. He had everything, money, success, a loving wife, and he had thrown it all away for a brief moment of selfishness. For an affair that meant nothing compared to the life he had built with her. "I'm sorry, Sophie," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Sophie reached over, placing a hand on his arm. "I know you're sorry. But that doesn't change what's happened. You can't keep apologizing for everything you've done. At some point, you need to face the consequences, and that means confronting Anna. But also, confronting yourself. What kind of man do you want to be moving forward?" Her words hit him harder than any of the previous conversations. Confronting himself. It was something he had avoided, something he had run from for so long. He had spent years building the perfect life, the perfect image, only to watch it all crumble in a matter of months. And now, he was faced with the hardest question of all: who was he really? The man who had made all the wrong choices, or the man who had the strength to change? "I need to see her," Thomas said suddenly, the urgency in his voice startling even him. "I need to face her. I need to look her in the eyes and tell her the truth. All of it. I need to tell her everything." Sophie gave him a steady look, as if assessing whether he truly understood the gravity of what he was about to do. She knew that facing Anna wasn't just about apologizing, it was about facing the reality of his actions and being willing to accept whatever came next. "Are you sure?" Sophie asked quietly. "Are you ready to hear the things she's going to say to you? Are you ready to face the truth, even if it means losing her forever?" Thomas took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew that Anna might never forgive him. But he also knew that if he didn't try, if he didn't give it everything he had left, he would regret it for the rest of his life. "I'm ready," he said. His voice was firm now, the determination clear in his eyes. Sophie didn't say anything. She just gave him a nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement of the difficult road ahead.